Okay, so today's guest is Wu Lin, who is going to talk about utilizing mathematical structures for efficient machine learning. So, please.
Okay, hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about this talk, utilizing mathematical structures for efficient machine learning. So let's first introduce myself. So my name is Wu Lin. So I'm my research in geometric methods for optimization and inference. And I got a PhD degree from the University of British Columbia, Canada. And my PhD advisor of Mark Smith and Andy Kang, and also unofficially supervised Frank Nielsen. And during my PhD, I worked with Mark on numerical optimization, with Andy on approximate inference, with Frank on information geometry. I'm currently a postdoc at the Vector Institute for AI. I'm working with Roger and Ali Reza in large-scale neural net training and ASAP. So let's begin. Okay, let's start with the motivation of this talk and have a look at this figure. So from this figure, we can see that neural-like methods are more efficient than gradient descent in classical settings, such as on simple models, full batch, or deterministic settings. However, neural-like methods are rarely used in modern machine learning, such as large models, mini batches, stochastic settings. So instead, stochastic gradient descent is the method of choice in many modern machine learning applications. And this raises an important question: can we improve the efficiency of modern machine learning systems? More specifically, can we design algorithms faster than stochastic gradient descent for deep models and in stochastic or mini batch settings, and while keeping the memory usage and iteration cost low? So there's a message. Should I just ignore? There's a message on the chat. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, cool. So I just cannot read the message on the chat.
No, it says, the question was whether they can give you, and they say that yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let me close it. Okay. So I stuck here. So let me. So how to close the chat? Should I do it? The technical issues. So voice freeze. You need to stop sharing. Yeah, I don't know why.
Go back to your room.
Okay, so I'll probably stop sharing first, and yeah, I'm going to reshare.
You guys ignore on Zoom whatever they say.
Okay, cool. Okay, so sorry. So my answer to this question is yes. We can improve the efficiency of modern machine learning systems by leveraging mathematical structures. And my answer, okay, sure. Okay. So my answer is grounded in my own research experience. So at the beginning of my PhD, I was on probabilistic inference. And at that time, I discovered that we can improve the efficiency of gradient-based methods by leveraging hidden convex duality, even in stochastic and non-convex settings. Later, I worked on optimization matrices. I found that we can leverage sparsity on matrices to design efficient numerical algorithms. And I'm currently working on large-scale neural net training with a low precision numerical constraint. And in this context, there are more challenges. However, we can overcome these limitations by utilizing geometric invariance. And there are more structures in modern machine learning systems. And in this talk, we're mostly focused on hidden structures in optimization and inference. For example, we'll talk about the convex duality, the sparsity, and also the invariance. And my answer also reflects my research goal. My research goal is to identify, develop, adapt mathematical structures for efficient machine learning. And mathematical structures are valuable because they provide us a principal framework for us to understanding machine learning, being able to design faster algorithms, and ultimately improve the efficiency of modern machine learning systems. So in this talk, I will illustrate the benefits of utilizing mathematical structures through several examples. First, I will show how we can interpret Newton's method as a Gaussian approximation from a probabilistic perspective. We then use this viewpoint to develop inverse-free methods for training deep neural nets. And finally, we'll turn to a Bayesian estimation, another key important aspect of modern machine learning, and we'll show how to generalize the Gaussian approximation for non-Gaussian inference in the Bayesian context. So let's start with the part one of this talk. So we're going to show how can we view a Newton's method as Gaussian approximation through a probabilistic lens. So first, I will give a brief introduction to Newton's method to ensure that we're all on the same page. So here, the goal is to minimize this function, and the function known as object function L. And Newton's method is an iterative optimization algorithms, and it constructs a local quadratic approximation to solve this problem. So given the complement, for example, given complement F0, we're going to use the gradient and the Hessian of the object function to form a quadratic approximation according to the second order head expansion. And here gradient means we use the first order derivative, and the Hessian means we're using the second order derivative. And we then identify the minimum solution of the quadratic approximation and then use it as starting from next iteration. And importantly, that the quadratic approximation must be convex or curve upward, so we can identify the minimum solution of the quadratic approximation. And we then just repeat the process and hopefully converge. So for example, at next iteration at x1, so we basically also compute the gradient and Hessian at the current point, and then construct another local quadratic approximation. And then identify the minimum solution of the quadratic approximation, and then use it as a starting from next iteration. Okay. So mathematically speaking, Newton's method uses the following update scheme. So here we can see the S is a preconditioning matrix. And in the Newton case, which is the Hessian, the second order information as the preconditioning matrix. And using the preconditioning step allow us to incorporate actual information into the gradient step. For example, in this case, we incorporate the second order information into the gradient step. So now I would like to introduce the variation of Gaussian approximation, which allow us to interpret Newton's method from a probabilistic perspective. So here, the goal is to approximate a given density distribution P that do not need to be normalized. The idea behind variation approximation is to consider a simple distribution Q to approximate the type distribution P. To measure how close Q is to P, we consider a statistical distance. So here we consider the Kell divergence. And here is the definition of the Kell divergence. And from this definition, we can see that the approximation Q to be normalized and should be similar enough to generate samples because we want to compute approximate the expectation. And in variation Gaussian case, we can see the approximation Q is a multivariate Gaussian with a mean mu and inverse covariance F. And the goal here is to minimize the Kell divergence between the Gaussian approximation and the type distribution P by jointly learning mu and S. By doing so, we find a Gaussian approximation that is close to the type distribution P. Now we're going to talk about how to view Newton's methods as a Gaussian approximation. The key idea is to consider this Kell divergence between a Gaussian approximation and a type distribution that takes an exponential form. And here the function L is exactly the object function that we would like to minimize in the Newton's case. And we then can use the definition of the Kell divergence to obtain following expression. So you can see that there are two terms in this expression, and the first term is known as a probabilistic representation of the object function L, and it's often used in gradient-free optimization. And the second term is known as the negative entropy of the Gaussian. And you have a closed form expression. And on the next slide, we will show that, in fact, we can view Newton's method as a natural descent on the Gaussian approximation, and know that natural descent is also known as stability descent in terms of the Kell divergence.
So this one, you are doing the L, the loss function, L is a loss function, right?
Yes.
So then you do the exponential, but then here you just,
No, this is according to definition of the K level. So this is according to definition of K
the
level.
definition.
Yeah.
But so you convert the loss to the distribution.
Yeah, so in fact, as we see shown that in fact can interpret the logistic function as a negative log likelihood. So that's why we do that. Yeah. So now we want to show the Newton method as a negative descent on the Gaussian. So we first going to introduce the Fisher information matrix as it plays essential role in natural descent. So let's talk about the definition of Fisher information matrix. So the Fisher information matrix by definition is a expected outer product. And we can see that the Fisher information matrix, in fact, is always positive semi-definite. In other words, its eigenvalues is always non-negative. And this is because that we can write this expected outer product as infinite sum of outer product. So we can guarantee it's always positive semi-definite. And more important, as we see, in fact, the Fisher information matrix contains extra information of the Gaussian, and we'll use it in natural descent. And more importantly, that we need to see that in fact, the Fisher information matrix is high dimensional. For example, we can see the mu is a D by 1 matrix, a D by 1 vector, and S is a D by D matrix. So in this case, the Fisher information matrix is at least D squared by D squared. But later we see that in fact the D is going to be number of neural parameters, so which means very high dimensional. Okay. So now we're going to introduce natural descent, and we want to solve this Gaussian approximation problem. So by definition, natural descent is a precondition of gradient descent, and where we use the Fisher information matrix as a preconditioning matrix. And at first glance, it seems that natural descent is computationally expensive because the Fisher information matrix is high dimensional. So which means naively inverting the Fisher information matrix gives to the D to the 6th time complexity, very expensive. But luckily, in the Gaussian case, they have structures in the Fisher information matrix, so we can leverage the structures and simplify this natural gradient step and obtain the following expression.
So this Fisher information matrix is obtained from the loss
No,
function
that's for the Gaussian.
for the Gaussian.
Yeah, we basically-
What you want to approximate.
Yes, so basically explore the structure of the surrogate approximation. So this is the key idea. So that's why it's entirely independent of the target function. And this will have a lot of structures here. So these are the key ideas. So if we simplify this expression, we can. So if we simplify this natural gradient step, we obtain this this following update scheme. And you can see that now look at this update scheme. We in fact we reduce the time complexity from D to the 6 to D to the 3 cubic complexity. And here the most expensive operation is the matrix inversion. And later we can reduce this. We can further reduce the complexity when the inverse coefficient matrix has structures or spars.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You can see from that example, the Gaussian approximation is not very good.
Yeah, yeah,
So
we're going
in
to.
general, since the approximation is not good, they're using the Gaussian structure
Yes.
over here. So what problems can arise given the approximation is not good and you're using that structure to obtain the?
So it depends on what kind of applications, right? So for example, in later we see that in the Bayesian settings, we want to do a density estimation, we want to go beyond Gaussian. But for optimization, we usually focus on just local minimums. So in this case, Gaussian is good enough. Yeah, okay, so you can see that basically now we reduce high complexity from D to the 6 to D to the 3 cubic complexity, but later we can further reduce it when as the inverse coefficient has structures. But here we also have another that shows that here we use the Stein lemma. So why we can do that magic called Stein lemma, which allow us to move the gradient from outside expectation to inside expectation. And this is very, very important. Unfortunately, yeah, so basically this is a very important result. And you can see that in fact this update scheme is very similar to Newton's method. I want to use it to solve the Gaussian approximation problem. And later, we will see that in fact we can generalize this Gaussian approximation for non-Gaussian problems in the Bayesian context. So I'll get back to you and go back part 3. But for now, we want to consider on solve the original problem, because solving the original problem is also very important. For example, in part 2, where the in fact a neural net training problem is also an example of the original problem. I have a question. So we can see that we in fact we can modify this update scheme to solve a vision problem. But consider a delta evaluation. So here delta evaluation means that we remove the expectation from the update scheme and evaluate gradient and Hessian at the mean. And if we set a step size beta equal to 1, we have Newton's method. So from here we can see that in fact we can view Newton's method as a natural descent on the Gaussian approximation with a delta evaluation. So this concludes the first part of this talk. So in this part, we establish a probable viewpoint and which allow us to interpret Newton's method as a Gaussian approximation. And here we can view the precondition matrix in the Newton case as the inverse covariance matrix of the Gaussian. And this is possible because we leverage the structures of the Fisher information matrix of the Gaussian to establish this connection. And as we soon see that in fact, we can use this viewpoint to design optimization for training deep neural nets, as we'll see in part 2. And we will design approximate inference methods in the Bayesian context, as seen in part 3. And we can even use this idea to design gradient-free optimization method. Okay, so now let's talk about part 2. We're going to already show we can view Newton's method as a Gaussian approximation. Then we're going to use this viewpoint to develop inverse-free methods for training deep neural nets. So first of all, I would like to review some training methods to ensure that we're on the same page. So in neural net training, we often solve a minimization problem. It takes the following form that is a sum of individual loss terms. And here mu denotes the learnable neural networks. And for many well-known training methods, they often follow this update scheme that takes this form. Here, S is known as the precondition matrix, and P is the root used in the update scheme. So for example, so in Stochastic gradient descent, S is the identity matrix, and P is equal to 1. And in Adam, the most satisfied optimizer, okay, okay, so I cannot see it here too. So maybe I can see. So S is a diagonal matrix, and P is equal to 2. Here, P equal to 2 means that in Adam, we use a square root in this update scheme. And from here, for all this well-known method, you can see that in most cases, S is a diagonal matrix, right? The diagonal preconditional. So this raises an important question. How about training methods with non-diagonal preconditioning matrix? Can such methods provide benefit for training deep neural nets? And answering this question will open the door to design new optimizers. And my answer is yes. So indeed, recent results have shown that non-diagonal methods outperform their diagonal counterparts. And indeed, just last year, the optimized Xiangpu won a challenge competition on training a variety of deep models. And then, as you can see from this metric, that it shows that Xiangpu, the optimizer, outperforms many of the well-known diagonal methods such as Adam and other FGD and etc. And this success highlights the great potential of non-diagonal methods for improving neural net training. But they still have challenges for non-diagonal methods if you want to train neural net in high precision. For example, in Xiangpu, we use a non-diagonal precondition matrix. And also here, the P is equal to 4, means we're using a matrix root in the update scheme. And because now the precondition matrix is no longer diagonal, so we have to use a matrix inversion and also the matrix decomposition into the update scheme. And these create for challenges because unlike scientific computing, in machine learning, we use high precision to train deep neural nets. And this is essential because using high precision data formats not only significantly reduce the memory consumption, but also boost the training speed. However, this introduces numerical instability. For example, many well-known matrix operations, such as matrix inversion and matrix decomposition, are numerically unstable in high precision, and therefore they are not available in high precision. For example, matrix inversion, TY decomposition, singular value decomposition, eigen decomposition are not available in high precision. You cannot find this in NumPy, SciPy, JAX, Julia, whatever you name it, because they're numerically unstable in high precision. And to overcome this limitation, Xiangpu had to convert the precondition matrix into single precision, sometimes double precision before performing matrix decomposition or inversion. And this slowed down the training. And the reason is, and we can observe that luckily that in matrix multiplication and matrix addition are efficient and stable in half precision. And this motivates us to consider inverse-free and decomposition-free methods that only use matrix multiplication and matrix addition. And we can show that we can obtain these methods by using this Gaussian interpretation. And here's a sneak peek to show that if we can make Xiangpu the optimizer inverse-free and decomposition-free, we can boost the performance. And this is because Xiangpu had to perform matrix decomposition in inversions, but our method can run in half precision.
So I missed it. Can you go back?
Yeah.
To the field slide? So what are you doing to get rid of this problem? What's in?
So we're going to consider more like equivalent transformations. So we're seeing it on the next slide, so they can make sure that we can solve this problem. So as an example, for simplicity, let's consider how to make Newton-like methods inverse-free. So and we can achieve that by using the Gaussian interpretation. So recall that in part 1, we showed that we can interpret Newton's method as a Gaussian approximation. And as a natural descent on the Gaussian approximation, we consider special coordinate where mu is the mean of the Gaussian and S is the inverse covariance of Gaussian. And because this is an iterative update scheme, and we perform an update, the new natural descent will essentially create a path along the Gaussian manifold from iteration 0 to iteration k. And here Gaussian manifold makes a set of Gaussians, so which means each point on the Gaussian manifold represents a Gaussian estimation. But when freedom use other coordinate systems. For example, we can consider another coordinate system where mu is the mean, this is the mean of the Gaussian, and sigma is the covariance of the Gaussian rather than its inverse. And we can perform natural descent using this coordinate. And this obtains the following update scheme. And you can see that in fact, this update scheme is inverse-free, and we only use matrix multiplication and matrix addition. And in other words, we can make Newton's method inverse-free, but more important, this is because natural descent is reparameterization invariant. So to give you some intuition of what I mean by reparameterization invariance, I would like to make an analogy. So consider we're driving from the airport to the department. We're going to follow a path, and we can either use a Google Maps or Apple Maps for navigation. And although the video representation may differ, both maps describe the same physical path. And this is a key idea of reparameterization invariant.
So initial motivation to go for second order methods is because we don't need to tune any size.
Yeah.
But here, because of the update of S beta appears in the eventual update. So, and still we need second order information. So
No, this is actually not, we don't use actually using second order information, but we want to using a structured preconditioner, not about second order here. The point is that I want to using a structured preconditioner. But here just an example to demonstrate that how to make Newton methods inverse-free. But in practice, we're never using second order information because it's very expensive to compute the hashing for neural nets, right?
So you are replacing that S in orange with this below 2 update.
Yeah, so here I just have an example to demonstrate how to make Newton-like methods inverse-free. Right. But I'm saying that practically you cannot compute the hashing on neural nets. You obviously cannot compute it. Here just demonstrate that how to make it inverse-free. So the point here is I want to make sure that I want to get rid of this S inverse by directly learning S inverse. So directly learning S inverse. So that's I don't need to do.
So what's the size of sigma?
You mean this one? Sorry.
Yeah,
Best step size. This step.
I mean the size of sigma. What's the dimension?
Oh, here. So here I assume everything there. But we're later going to reduce the making squat.
The question is that so you aim to avoid the inverse matrix, and inverse matrix is a fluid.
Yes.
But
Yes.
matrix like sigma times the lambda square times the sigma is still fluid, right?
Which one? Yeah, exactly.
So.
But the point is that the inversion is important.
So what's the long thing?
So the point is that if doing half precision, it will be 2 times faster.
Okay.
Even the constant, right? So even, for example, for training deep neural nets, I spend 100 times. But if I use inverse Fourier, I can spend maybe 50 times, 50 days. So the point is the trade-off. Even in complexity, it's the same, but the constant is matters for in the deep learning era, right?
Let's circle back to the previous question, if it's non-diagonal, sure, if it's diagonal, then the inverse is actually pretty much like free.
Yeah.
So.
So we only go.
But you haven't demonstrated the advantage of using non-diagonal
Yeah.
version
So
of the.
no, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, yes, but this page, well, I'm not familiar with this paper, so, technically, this point, this paper said I have advantage because I don't.
Okay. So
see
yeah.
any evidence.
So okay.
besides
So
the title of the paper.
this actually is from Meta and Google,
Right.
and they care about this.
Must be true.
Yeah.
That's the evidence.
They're from Meta and Google, so they actually care about this a lot. They actually care about this to design next generation optimizers.
Well, I have no doubt, I mean, in terms of the accuracy result, of course, of diagonal one covers the diagonal one, so I could just only getting better result than the non-diagonal one,
Yeah.
I mean, diagonal ones. But I mean, the question is like, how much better and whether it was actually the,
You can see here, right? So here actually you can see we have got 28% faster than the diagonal, and we achieve the same speed, equation cost.
So whenever somebody says 28% faster,
Yeah.
that's meaningless.
I see.
That means that instead of, that was on the 71 machines which they run.
No, so,
under a
yeah,
certain
yeah.
network connections and
So in
forth.
fact,
These numbers are meaningless.
Yeah.
That 28 is dependent on so many random variables, which.
Oh, exactly. So I need to add that. So here we're doing random search. So everything have run for more than 100 runs. So average them.
Still,
Yeah.
but he's saying, yeah, replicated result, right? They got the same,
That,
you
yeah.
got the same results.
Yeah, so the point here is saying is that if you use, so basically it's a benchmark provided by Google and also Meta. So we do not create the benchmark, so they create a benchmark.
Just one another intuitive question is, when we go from diagonal to non-diagonal
Mhm.
kind of field, intuitively, I would expect, of course, accuracy is better.
Yeah.
But I would expect them to be slower. So, but it looks like it is
So,
not even
so
better.
yeah, so the point, so they had catch. I think I have bonus slide saying that in fact, for deep neural training, the back propagation and also the forward parts and back parts takes 90% of time. So actually, it's not about this non-diagonal part. It's about the back propagation. If you have very large models, the back propagation on the forward and backward is very expensive, and this was going to dominate, especially for very deep models.
but then in this case, the inverse of, non-diagonal.
No,
matrix
this
seems
no
to
this
have
this
some
even in this case, so compared to the diagonal case, but the inverse case still matters. So this is a trade-off. So we actually have a trade-off here. It's not that very obvious.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's continue to see your result. Okay.
Yeah, right. So okay. So here is the case that we can show that. So and also we can in fact can make sparse. We can go beyond beyond block diagonal. You can also use block diagonal. It's a straightforward idea. So here the problem is that if you can so that problem is that if you want to make a preconditioner or inverse Fourier matrix is sparse, well you will need to make sure it's the positive definite, right? The preconditioner, so which means the eigenvalue is being positive. But this can be very difficult to solve in general because it's a quite definite constraint. But we can consider another reparameterization. So consider the library learning a Cholesky vector field. And because we're doing that, now we can remove the positive definite constraint. When we consider so here we're going to consider trifecta D going to be a square non-singular matrix, and then we add sparsity onto the trifecta D. And here's an example to show that if you can learn a sparse Cholesky with including structures into the preconditioner. These are demonstrations. I'm not saying that you can use this one in neural net case. Okay, so, but the point is that how going to design update scheme to preserve the sparsity? So this is the main question. How going to design update scheme to preserve the, the sparsity? So it turns out that for the product factor like matrix B, it has to be a square, non-singular matrix. So this remind us basically is the general linear group, because for me it's actual algebra. So importantly, it means that the matrix, the structure is preserved on the matrix multiplication and matrix addition. And our updates can only using matrix multiplication and matrix addition. And this allows to preserve the sparsity. So the idea is that we're going to leverage the matrix group structures, and we're going to consider the factor B is a sparse subgroup of the general linear group. Of course, that you go to the neural net training, you're needing the Kronecker structures, but it's out of scope this talk. So here are some results on Bayesian transformers. We also have some more results in the Bayesian context. So here we're going to show that we can train a model using a method using a Bayesian transformer with 55 million parameters and on a subset image net. And here we can see that basically our method performs as good as shampoo in terms of iteration or epochs, and we can clearly see that non-diagonal method performs much better than diagonal method.
So have you tried this on the diffusion transformer?
I think we only try it on Bayesian transformers and also language models like NanoGPT, but I've never tried in the diffusion model.
That should be interesting.
New question.
Have you tried this on diagonal matrices or anything?
What do you mean by diagonal matrices?
Like, have you seen like if this has any sort of effect if the matrix is diagonal from?
So, but this diagonal, Adam is a diagonal preconditional, right? Yeah. So here it shows that even in test laws, so actually it's 100 minus test accuracy.
Well, I mean, Adam use diagonal matrix, and if beating Adam doesn't mean you can beat any diagonal.
Yeah, but the point is that, yeah, sure. But the point is that we have all these well-known training methods. We can show this output from all these existing diagonal methods. I cannot rule out that. At least I don't have a theory saying that our method is, uniformly better than all these diagonal methods. So, but at least we show that we can beat, this well-known.
The previous result, you said that they beat the non-diagonal one and beating the diagonal by 28% here. That's also compared to, when you see the diagonal case, do they also compare to Adam?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
So
they're not beating best diagonal case, but this.
no Adam, all the well-known, for example, Nashville Adam, all these commonly used, and across a variety of models, not just one particular model, but this is a demonstration that we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So in fact, this now is very popular now. If you look at the archive, there's so many papers about how to do second order. They're not second order, but structured precondition matrix. We go through the archive.
How expensive are those inputs?
I don't know. So the point is that so it really depends. For shampoo, it's very expensive because the matrix decomposition inversions. But now everything running half precision and we're doing inverse free. In fact, now it's as fast as Adam. But the reason, the tricks that we can use is that.
But you are not computing the same in my head, and it's computing that.
Yes. Yeah. So the point is that we make it using available GPU resources. So if we consider using the same resources, maybe it's unfair. But if we assume that here, I think the setting is that if we assume that using GPU H100s, we assume that we're using the same number of GPU number of H100s. So how much we can improve compared to Adam?
Can you give me a number? How much more expensive is one input?
So it depends on the trick here is that
On that setup on ImageNet 25 or whatever, how much more expensive is one input?
So no, but this is the caveat here is that so even in this case it's true that here we need to update the preconditioner, right? But in non-diagonal case, I can update this preconditioning less frequently. So here we always update the neural net weights for every iterations. But here I can update this for every k iterations. So I can use this. So this is actually the idea to reduce the time complexity in non-diagonal case. And for example, to get example in shampoo, they usually update this precondition for every 100 iteration to match the iteration cost in Adam. But in our case, we can update this for every two iterations to match iteration cost in Adam. So really depends on how frequently we can update this precondition, because this is the most expensive operations. Of course, that here we actually have no structures, but when you have structures, in fact, this can be much efficient compute. So yeah.
Can you go back to the figure quickly?
Oh, that or
The figure. I think not your asking, I was saying, go to the figure.
Because for VIT.
oh
Convergence.
The
The convergence figure.
Here, you mentioned that it's 2 times faster.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it is like for a given level of test loss, it requires half number of epochs.
yeah. So
Are you saying
no, this is in that time.
In terms of all clock
So
time?
this is in the epochs.
Okay.
So
Sounds
basically-
like the same epochs, but every epoch is like twice faster.
Yeah, it's quite faster.
So, but to summarize, the speed up comes from two things. One is you're using the single accuracy versus the double accuracy.
No, this is in half precision.
The half position, okay.
Yes,
So it's a half position compared to single position.
yes.
Plus, you don't have to calculate the inverse of
Yes.
the.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
second order
yes.
information.
Yeah, so this is the demonstration, and there are more results on papers. So, and we're also trying to scale this method on large language models. And so, okay, so this any more questions before move on to the Bayesian concept. So this for optimization, and then move on to the inference. Okay, so let's do a quick summary before you. And
Sorry, I have one more question. So you talk about the sparse decomposition into the DB transpose format. To ensure it's a, positive definite. Did the sparsity does anything here? Because it seems like you mentioned the B can be sparse, but then.
yeah, so here is that you can consider B is a chart, it's a quantical factors. It's another
Oh,
internal.
I'm well aware of, how to do those decomposition, but my question is the sparsity contribute to your, speed up here, or if it is just, because it seems like you just mentioned it can be sparse, and again, I mean, what does sparsity plays a role here?
So
Did that help with convergence? Did it just help your speed?
it's speed. So because we can compute, basically here we can mount. So here, I mean, because it's sparse, right? We can leverage sparsity to it, so that we can reduce the time complexity, right?
But the sparsity, this specific sparsity structure was just chosen by hand?
Yeah, so now we don't know what type of structure is useful. So it really depends on whether it's for optimization and inference. So you can consider, in fact, it's more like Gaussian approximation, right?
Right.
So you can apply in the optimized settings and also to the inference settings.
So you also don't know if you use a different sparse structure or maybe non-sparse structure, would that speed up your convergence even furthermore, or maybe, drop down the of course, the per epoch speed a little bit?
No, the point is that, so in fact, the result actually shows that if in dense case it's very good, and we want to make sure that in the sparse case, we can further improve the performance.
The question, how do you achieve the sparse?
I mean,
So,
how
yeah.
do you choose these sparse to
So, yeah, so
because there's so many different ways to choose.
yeah,
sparse.
exactly. So this we don't know. So we just need to, we currently just try to figure out which one is the best. So this I don't know. And because we only show that our update scheme can support this sparsity, but we do not know which one we should use. Okay, so that's is there more questions? So okay, so let's do a quick summary of the part 2. To introduce and leverage the invariance and matrix group structures to design a fast algorithms for training deep neural nets. So now we're going to turn to the Bayesian settings, because the Bayesian is another important aspect of modern machine learning, and because we can using Bayesian for uncertainty estimation, sequential learning, and probabilistic reasoning. In the Bayesian context, we need to consider Bayesian density estimation. And unfortunately, the exact Bayesian uncertainty estimate, the Bayesian density estimation is often intractable. So we need to consider approximation. So a straightforward idea is to consider a Gaussian approximation. But as you can see that from here that the Gaussian approximation on the left is not accurate approximation of the exact Bayesian approximation on the right. So this motivates us to go beyond Gaussian to consider more accurate non-Gaussian approximation.
So what's the intuition? What's the difference between Gaussian approximation,
So-
Bayesian?
So the reason is that Gaussian is just single mode,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason that this really is not a good approximation,
Mhm.
and that's why I want to go beyond that. And
But
in
but
terms,
what's the intuition of Bayesian?
there's no best.
Huh?
Ideally, you want to, the point that always a trade-off, right? The trade-off.
Hmm.
They usually want to consider more, so the point is that if only more accurate, they need parallel price computational resources, right? So they actually have a trade-off. So we need to choose that However, focus on more efficient approximation or more expensive. For example, you can do multi-color sampling method. In that case, it's more accurate, but it usually will be 10 times or 100 times slower. So they actually have trade-off we have to make. Yeah. Okay. So here the main motivation is that we want to go beyond non-Gaussian approximation, but why still keep it to be efficient? Because we don't want to using multi-color method. In that case, it will be much slower. So okay, so to do that, I will first remind you that in fact the neural net training problem can be viewed as a maximum likelihood estimation, and this because that this allows to naturally generate the Bayesian setting. So this is because that in part 2 we show that we want to minimize this object function, and we can view it as a negative log likelihood, and this is because we can define the likelihood as in the exponential form, and this is usually true if you're using cos entropy laws or square laws. And so you can see that in fact minimizing the object function L is equivalent to maximizing likelihood. So you can view it as a maximum likelihood estimation, the point estimation. And this allows to naturally move to Bayesian estimation. So here we're going to consider Bayesian estimation. So the reason that we want to do Bayesian estimation, let me remind you that because we want to have a uncertainty estimation and also sequential learning and also probabilistic reasoning. So we want to consider more like Bayesian density estimation. And so we're going to consider Bayesian neural net training as an example. So in the non-Bayesian case, we actually want to find point estimation. Here, W denotes the neural net weight, for example, like the consider 2D for illustration. But in the Bayesian settings, we want to consider a density distribution of the neural net weight. So if they consider 1 point on this figure, we want to consider area. So but we can use the base rule to compute the Bayesian density estimation. So and by the base in the Bayesian settings, we know the likelihood, which is exactly what we used on the previous slide. And we also have the prior. So for example, we consider a Gaussian with zero mean. And here W, let me remind you, is a neural net weight. And here we treat it as a random variable. So in Bayesian settings. And we can use the base rule to compute the posterior. And ideally, we want to generate samples from the posterior, and then you can use it for applications. But unfortunately, the denominator is computationally intractable because it involves a high dimensional integration. So we can generate samples from the posterior. So of course, we can use the idea that the variation approximation, right? For example, in the Gaussian case, we can minimizing the curve divergence between Gaussian and the posterior. And in the variational settings, we do not require for example, in this case, the posterior be normalized. So which means that solving this minimizing problem is currently solving another minimizing problem. So it's equivalent to minimizing the curve divergence between the Gaussian and the joint distribution. And here we can see we drop the denominator. But we want to go beyond non-Gaussian, and this is because that if we consider non-Gaussian case, for example, in this very simple model, we can see the Gaussian. So this on the left is the Gaussian approximation, on the right the skewed Gaussian approximation, and we can see that the skewed Gaussian approximation is more, at least it looks like more accurate in terms of curve divergence. And this is also true if we look at another example. So here we can see that if we consider Gaussian, so this is a Gaussian approximation, and these are exact approximation. So the exact density. And you can see the mix of Gaussian approximation, you can see that in fact it's more accurate, obtain more accurate approximation. Right. So this motivates us to consider more accurate approximation. For example, consider mixture, find a mixture of Gaussian or skewed Gaussian approximation. So in other words, we want to solve these 9 problems, and we have so it's the curve divergence between the non-Gaussian approximation and the joint distribution. And we want to use natural descent to solve this problem, and this is because compared to gradient descent, as you can see from the figure, the natural descent can be much faster than gradient descent in terms of iteration or epochs. And also, I mean, in Gaussian case, we can show that in fact the natural descent has a similar cost, iteration cost as gradient descent, and this is because the feature information matrix is structured, and that's why we can simplify at least in part 1. But there's some limitation of natural descent in a non-Gaussian case. So in the non-Gaussian case, the feature information matrix may no longer have structure. So it can be very expensive to invert the feature information matrix. And also the feature information matrix can be singular. So it is unclear how to invert the Fisher information matrix. But luckily, for class of approximation known as exponential families, we have the Fisher information matrix have structures, so we can make natural descent efficient, and later we can generalize to mixed exponential family approximation. And so here, what's my exponential family is a normalized log linear distribution, and it contains many well-known distributions like beta distribution, gamma, and Gaussian, including a special case. And so in this case, so here, what I mean by exponential family, so usually this density function can be expressed as a inner product inside the exponential. And here lambda known as a primal parameter. And here function t only depends on the random variable w. And we're going to perform natural descent in this parameterization. And here is the example to show that because we know that Gaussian distribution is a member of the exponential family. So here we show that how to convert Gaussian distribution to become an exponential family distribution. And the key idea why we want to perform natural descent in this coordinate is because that in this case, the Fisher information matrix, in fact, is a Jacobian matrix. So which means that inverting the Fisher information matrix now become very easy. Simply just swap the denominator and numerator. And here the M is known as the dual parameter is the expectation of the function t. And if you actually know, exponential family, this is known as sufficient statistics, and this is natural parameters, and this we call expectation parameter. But if you're not familiar with it, just consider this a primal and this is a dual. So now we can simplify the natural gradient computation. So here now it becomes much easier to compute now. So because here it's easy to invert the Fisher information matrix by simply swap the denominator and numerator. And we can further simplify this. So it becomes the gradient with respect to the dual parameter. And this significantly reduces the iteration cost on natural descent. Now we can return as the gradient with respect to the, so now the natural gradient becomes the gradient with respect to the dual parameter. And in fact, this simple result is actually have many nice structures. They call it duality, and also the dual parameter, also known as convex conjugate. And also its update, in fact, is known as the mirror descent. You formulate optimization. And also they also known as the Legendre transform. And you can formulate with they also have a Hamiltonian and Lagrangian formulation. But because time constraint, so this out stop this.
So this gradient now is of what? Because it seems like gradient descent, but this is now gradient of
Yeah,
something else. Okay.
So it's more like dual. So here, so this is a primal and this is a dual. So as a comparison, let's look at this. Right. So this is a primal. So this is everything primal, right? So computer, we're using a gradient in the dual to update the primal. But in the gradient descent case, we're using the gradient of the primal to update the primal. But the main point here is that they have similar iteration cost. But if you look at the iteration, so here's in terms of iteration. So you can see that in fact, you can see that natural descent is much faster than gradient descent, but now we have similar iteration cost. So in overall, we can see that natural descent is much faster than gradient descent.
So give us an intuition why. Because like
Okay, so
so just let me explain why it thinks we keep thinking about duals, right?
yes,
But then the dual of the dual is a dual, right? So
yeah.
why?
So
Why is one of them?
So in fact,
So
the
for
natural
me-
gradient descent, as I mentioned before, is the steepest descent in terms of Kell divergence. And the Kell divergence is the proper way to measure the difference between the distributions. So if we consider gradient descent, you can view it as it's the L2 distance. And usually in the statistical settings, it's not a very accurate distance to measure the difference between two distributions.
Depends on what you are interested in, right? It
It's
says that the Kell divergence is the one I want.
no, usually
Maybe I
so.
want something
Yeah,
else.
but the point is that, for example, consider an example is, for example, Poisson definite matrices, right? So you want to measure the difference between two Poisson matrices. If you're using the Euclidean distance, usually it's not very good because we do not capture the constraint. So basically, in this distance, we actually leverage the structures, the Poisson definite constraints there. And this is why that this the hidden mathematics that if we taking the constraint into account when doing the computation, in fact, this matters.
Does this duality suffer from duality gap or not?
No, this is different duality. So this is more like complex conjugate.
So just give an intuition, what's a dual right there? it's simple, what's the, suppose somebody doesn't know all the limits,
Mhm.
what's the dual mean here?
I think it will be, looks like, let me see, so.
So here, like you have a last function, we find a gradient, we do a gradient descent, right?
Yes.
So the second equation is doing what?
You mean this one, right?
Yes.
Natural gradient descent.
Mhm.
So I think the reason, so here we only show that in fact it's equivalent to natural gradient descent. So the point here I want to make especially is that this can significantly reduce the iteration cost. And this connection not only connect to duality or connect to the natural gradient descent. So there are many ways to interpret. So we can either interpret using the duality or interpret as the natural gradient descent part. And if we interpret in the gradient descent, natural gradient descent part, because they're equivalent in this case. So in fact, it means that it's just I mentioned before that we measure different with the difference, we try to measure difference between the different Gaussian approximations. I also have a bonus slide to make it more
Does
clear.
it converge to the same thing?
You mean, so assuming that there is convex case, yes. And in the non-convex case, maybe it's not.
Well, in the convex case, obviously it converges to the same thing, but
Yeah.
otherwise, does it?
So usually this one is, so the point that why this is very useful, in fact, is connect to expectation maximization algorithms.
But you see, if it's convex, then you don't need to lower this.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, but the point is to test that whether this method is used, I mean, in fact, it's reasonable or not. So that's why we start with a convex case, and then we go to beyond non-convex. So this is in fact non-convex problems.
The plot on the right, in some sense, if we look in the same initial point, it seems like gradient descent
No,
was just a little bit.
no, in fact, we're using the same method. That's, I mean, call it scale case long because we start at the same point.
Okay,
So this actually should be considered the first iteration.
If the y-axis is correct, will it really tell us for 5 as well?
Yeah. So this is all stochastic thing, it's double stochastic. So here we need to compute the gradient, but gradient is internal expectation, and also doing mini batches. So it's more like stochastic, it's double stochastic. So here you can see that, so let me go back to. So basically this. So one the stochastic from the mini batch, right? Another one is to have expectation. So in order to do that, we need first of all using mini batch case, and we also need to approximate the expectations using Monte Carlo samples. Okay, any more questions?
The real issue over here is, not just the speed of convergence, but whether you do get convergence.
Yeah, so we actually prove. Yeah, but we need to require some conditions, so otherwise we cannot guarantee this.
No, but in practice, I mean, you don't.
Yeah, so we actually have a result to show that it's converged. At least, I mean, we achieve a similar, I mean, a reasonable result. Yeah, so. Yeah. And we can also extend it to a continual finite mixture exponential family approximation. And in this case, so this is closely related to the stochastic expectation maximization algorithms. So let's talk about impact. So impact. So impact will open a redirection on natural gradient descent variation inference. It has been used in many probability programming libraries such as GPFlow for Gaussian hypothesis and also for TensorFlow probability for probabilistic reasoning. It also won a competition on post-year approximation for ImageNet training, and News 2021 also won a prize, 3,000 USD. And we basically, in this case, our benchmark is the Monte Carlo method. And also it has been scaled by other research, has been used by adapted by other researchers to scale Bayesian inference on GPT-2 with 700 million parameters. So this conclude. Any more questions?
okay.
So this conclude the part of this talk. So it's that we introduce and utilize duality to design efficient non-Gaussian inference methods, and we can support exponential family approximations such as gamma, beta, categorical, and other distributions. We can also support a mixture and finite mixture exponential family approximation such as still Gaussian, student T, finite mixture Gaussian, and more. So now I'll give you some take-home message for wrap up.
Do you still have the sales order part?
Sorry?
You have the derivative free part, right?
Oh, no, so because of time, so I just cut that.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so I would like to give some take home message. So at part one, we introduce a Gaussian implementation of Newton's method. And then part two, we show that this implementation enables fast neural net training through reparameterization. And in part three, we show that this exponential reparameterization induced duality, which enable efficient non-Gaussian inference. And overall, we can see that leveraging mathematical structures such as reparameterization and duality are useful to design fast algorithms in optimization and inference for machine learning. That's it. I'm happy to take in more questions.
So the reason, like, you know, if you wanted to introduce as interpretation of Newton method, your Newton method converges quickly, but it's computationally expensive, because you have to compute in Hessian, right? So here, you are able to show that you don't have to compute Hessian.
Yeah, no, so for neural training, we're never going to compute the Hessian. So actually need to bring some, I have bonus slide to show. Okay, so give me some. So this is the case that we now consider in the diagonal case. So you can see that we need to use AutoDiff. So to compute the gradient, so we need to require forward function evaluation and the gradient evaluation. And here is the example to show that. So if we can, so here we can see the atom. So you can see that 90% of time is about the gradient computation. Here we can consider using an atom, the diagonal case, as a benchmark. So you can say 90% of time, in fact, is about the forward computation and also backward computation. And this is why to make it existing methods, non-diagonal method is not useful. For example, for if you consider Newton CG and also LBGS, they're not very efficient. This is because in Newton CG, we need to compute the hash of the product, and this usually will be 4 times expensive in the settings. And also in LBGS, it's also very expensive because we need to do line search. And for line search, we need to do a forward evaluation. And more importantly, that in the mini batch settings, the line search method may not work well, because usually the line search means we want to be a relatively greedy, right? In the SOCAS settings, it's at least for now, I think it's still the active research area. I don't know how to do a proper line search in the SOCAS settings, and that's why the existing or these well-known methods, this is a very state-of-the-art method in the deterministic settings, doesn't work well in the neural net training, in the neural net case settings. It's because the stochasticity and also it's very large. So there are some. Okay, so I think someone has raised a hand on
I have a
Zoom. So I'm not
question.
sure.
Sorry, I have a question. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure if they have time.
Okay, cool.
Sorry. Thank you very much.